Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F-words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic!
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
Hello and welcome back to Fuck That. If you're new here, don't forget to hit subscribe so that way you never miss an episode. Today we are going to be talking about a couple of different topics: money, power, and the kind of privilege that makes the law bend. Not break, just lean a little bit depending on who's asking. Today we're talking about a murder in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in America. And it led to this case that got tangled up with one of the most powerful families in the country. Martha Moxley was just 15 years old when she was brutally murdered on October 30th of 1975. Martha was beaten and stabbed with a golf club that came straight from her neighbor's home, the Skakel home. And yet, for decades, nobody was held accountable. Investigators had suspects. They had strong suspicions, but they didn't seem to have the willingness to take on a family name with ties to American royalty. But the thing about power is it doesn't last forever, and when the cracks finally started forming in the case, when the right people started asking questions, the Skakel Kennedy name wasn't enough to keep the truth buried anymore. This is a story of a murder, a Kennedy family suspect, and a justice system that failed for one of the most powerful families in American history. Let's talk about Martha Moxley and where she lived. Greenwich, Connecticut wasn't and still isn't to this day the kind of place where murders happen, at least not the kinds that make headlines. Greenwich is a town that was built on money and power, and everybody there kind of has this unspoken agreement that scandal was something that they would handle quietly within the community. But on October 30th of 1975, that diamond-encrusted facade that Greenwich worked so hard to build shattered. Martha Moxley was just 15 years old when she was murdered just feet from her own front door. She and her family actually had only lived in Greenwich for a little bit over a year. They moved from Piedmont, California in the summer of 1974. But just in that short time, Martha had fully settled in. She was really outgoing, friendly, and popular, and the kind of girl who just effortlessly made friends. Martha didn't just live in Greenwich, Connecticut, though. She actually lived in Belhaven, which is a really exclusive, gated community where wealth wasn't just assumed, it was expected. And this is actually one of the, to this day, wealthiest communities in the country. Across the street from Martha lived the Skakel family, a Kennedy-adjacent family that was known to be over the top and completely unchecked. That summer, the summer of 1975, Martha had become friendly with the Skakel brothers, Thomas, who was 17 years old at the time, and Michael, who was 15 at the time. Unfortunately for Martha, both of them had developed a strong infatuation with her. An obsession, if you will. And obsession, especially when it's mixed with privilege and never being told no, it never leads anywhere good. To understand how a murder could happen in a neighborhood like this and go unsolved for decades, I think it's important to talk about the neighborhood of Belhaven and the bubble that people are in that live in this neighborhood. Belhaven, one of the wealthiest communities in America, isn't just a neighborhood. It is truly a fortress for the uber-rich, a place where people with the right last names and the necessary amount of zeros in their bank accounts lived behind gates, hedges, and an understanding that whenever something bad happened there, it didn't actually happen there. The streets are lined with massive estates, each one more secluded than the next. There are security guards that man the entrance, ensuring that outsiders didn't just stroll in. And private patrol cars made their rounds, reinforcing the idea that Belhaven would be kept in this really rich bubble where nothing bad could happen. But somehow, in this really highly protected, wealthy, lockdown community, a 15-year-old girl was murdered in her own yard, and nobody saw anything. Or, at least, nobody was willing to say what they saw. And this is the thing about a place like Belhaven. When something bad happens in a neighborhood like this, or with a community or family like this, you don't call the police, you call your fixer, and then you call your lawyer. So let's talk about the last night of Martha's life. It was October 30th, mischief night, and Martha and her friends wanted to go out and have some fun. Classic teenager shit. There was no school the next day for Martha and her friends. They had gone to public school. But for the private school kids, which includes the Skakel family, the Skakel brothers, there was class in the morning. Martha's dad, David Moxley, was out of town on a business trip, and her mom, Dorothy, trusted her daughter to come home at a reasonable time. They didn't really set a curfew. It was more of a mutual understanding that she would come home when it was appropriate. Martha actually had her own party planned for the next day, so she wasn't planning on staying out late anyway. The Skakel home was set to have a party that night, and it was the place to be. Their father, Rushton Skakel, was also out of town on business, and this meant that the house really had zero adult supervision outside of the live-in tutor. I feel like if you have a group of really rich, unsupervised teenagers, you already know that it is just destined to be a shit show in some capacity. At 6:30 that evening, Martha left her home and she was wearing a blue down parka over a white flower print turtleneck and blue jeans. She and her friend Helen met up with Jeffrey and Jackie, and together they all headed to the Skakel home. Before we get into more details that night, I think it's really important to talk about the Skakels and their relation to the Kennedy family. If you were rich in Greenwich, you were really rich. But then there were the Skakels, who made the really rich people look like middle class. Their fortune came from Great Lakes Carbon, which was one of the biggest privately held companies in the world at that time. Money was not a problem for the Skakels, but accountability was. The Kennedy connection only amplified their audacity. So Rushton, the father, his sister Ethel married Bobby Kennedy, the Bobby Kennedy, RFK Jr.'s father. They married in 1950, and this officially linked the Skakels to one of the most powerful families in America. And that's the kind of privilege that doesn't just open doors, it can also slam them shut when you need them to. The Skakels had been in Greenwich for several decades. By 1975, they moved there during the Great Depression because they were thriving. People in town knew exactly who they were. Not necessarily in a holy shit, we're intimidated by them, they're super rich and awesome kind of way, but more of a what the fuck kind of chaos are they going to get away with next. Great Lakes Carbon was actually founded in 1919 by George Skakel, Rushton's father, and he built the company into a massive industrial empire. He and his wife Anne had 7 kids, including Rushton and Ethel, the one who married into the Kennedys. Not long after 1950, a series of disasters began to occur. In 1955, Rushton's parents, George and Anne, died in a plane crash, and they left their fortune to their children. Actually, Great Lakes Carbon went to George Jr., Rushton's brother. However, in 1966, George Jr. also died in a plane crash, which left Rushton in charge of the family business, a massive fortune, and 7 children. Rushton ended up marrying Anne Reynolds, and they had 7 children together. Rushton, Julie, Thomas, John, Michael, David, and Stephen. At 4 years old, Thomas, who's going to be a large component of this story, along with his brother Michael, was actually thrown from a moving vehicle and sustained head injuries that allegedly caused erratic behavior. In 1973, Anne died of brain cancer. And from there, everything kind of spiraled, particularly for Michael. Rushton was not exactly known to be Parent of the Year because he had this company to run. But after Anne's death, he left the actual raising of his children to house staff, private tutors, and an endless supply of money. He wasn't home much, and when he was home, he was not paying attention to his children. And this was the environment that Michael Skakel grew up in, a place where consequences were kind of optional, money cleaned up whatever messes were left behind. Michael Christopher Skakel was the fifth out of 7 kids by Rushton and Anne, and unfortunately, he had a lot going on. After his mother, Anne, died of brain cancer, which happened when he was 13, he started drinking. RFK Jr., and I'll talk about this more, ended up writing a book about this case, and he's cousins with Michael. So he talked a lot about Michael's childhood, and he mentioned that Michael actually suffered from dyslexia, but he wasn't diagnosed with that until he was 26. So he failed out of multiple schools and had a lot of problems with that. Neighbors of the Skakels said that the children were essentially feral. They were given too much money and no structure. In RFK Jr.'s book, he confirmed that Rushton suffered from alcohol use disorder, and he both ignored and abused Michael. Fast forwarding back to Mischief Night, October 30th of 1975, you have both Michael and his older brother Tommy, coming from difficult upbringings, competing for Martha's attention. According to Martha's mother, Dorothy, Martha wrote about Tommy in her diary, describing an incident where he tried to get to first and second base with her. Martha did not want this, and so she pushed him off. On the night of October 30th, Tommy and Michael were actually about to start competing with Martha right in front of each other, which is an absolute recipe for disaster. Martha headed to the Skakel home that night where there was going to be a party along with her friend Helen. Helen's dad was the president of Cadbury Schweppes, along with her friend Jackie, whose dad had been the chairman of the American Dairy Association, and their friend Jeffrey. Bellhaven went out of their way to increase security on Mischief Night, but not to punish what the kids there intended to do. It was more of to make sure that nobody got in to cause mischief in their neighborhood. At 7:30 p.m., they showed up at the Skakel home, but Tommy, Michael, and the rest of the kids weren't there. The family gardener told them that they had gone along with their tutor, their cousin James Terrian, and their sister's friend Andrea Shakespeare. The group went to Bellhaven Club, and they were having dinner and drinks. So the group left. They ended up going to Jackie's home, dropping her off. So a little after 9 p.m., the group gets to the Skakel home without Jackie, Martha, Jeffrey, and Helen. And by that time, the Skakel kids and everybody was back home and the party had begun. The group, along with Michael, decide to take the party to the Skakel family's Lincoln Continental to listen to music. The way that they describe this seating leads me to believe that this year of this car probably had like a family-style seat in the front, so you could have multiple people sitting in the front because there isn't like 2 separate individual seats, almost like a bench. So Martha and Michael sat up front. Her friends Helen and Jeffrey sat in the back. By 9:15, though, Tommy came outside and he ended up sliding in the front next to Martha. So you now have 2 brothers on either side of Martha, and they are both vying for her attention, which obviously isn't going to go well. Michael was pissed off by this because he felt like his older brother Tommy, was ruining his chance to have kind of a moment with Martha. By 9:30 p.m., the night was winding down. A few of the older Skakel brothers, which included Rushton Jr., John, along with their cousin Jim Terrian, they came outside and they said, everybody needs to get the fuck out of the Lincoln. We need it to drive Jim home, their cousin. So everybody got out, but before leaving, Michael had asked Martha if she wanted to go with him to his cousin Jimmy's home. She said no, she had to get home. Thomas, however, decided that he was not going to go on this trip to his cousin's house. Helen and Jeffrey, Martha's friends, decided to leave, and as they're walking down the Skakel driveway to leave, the last thing that they saw was both Martha and Tommy engaging in what they would later refer to as flirtatious horseplay. And that was the last time that they ever saw their friend Martha alive. While this is all going on at the Moxley home, Dorothy was home alone. Again, her husband, Martha's father, David, was out of town on business. And John, Martha's older brother, he was 17, was out with friends. So it was a quiet night for Dorothy. She spent the evening painting, and around 9:30 or 10, she heard what she would later describe as a commotion coming from outside. It wasn't something that was alarming to her or something that she felt like she needed to investigate. In a place like Belhaven that's gated and patrolled, crime wasn't exactly a concern. So she kind of just noted that she heard it, but didn't bother to look into it further. She finished painting, she cleaned up, she took a shower, and by 11 p.m., she was downstairs watching some news on the TV. Shortly after that, John came home. Dorothy decided to start a movie, but she ended up falling asleep on the couch waiting for Martha to come home. When she woke up sometime between 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. And she felt like something was wrong. Martha still was not home. So Dorothy woke John up and told him to go check around the neighborhood. She thought that maybe Martha had lost track of time and was having a good time. Maybe she stayed over at a friend's house. John left, he looked around, and he eventually came back with nothing. And at that point, Dorothy started to make phone calls. The first call was to Helen, who she went with to the Skakel party. And she said that the last time that she saw Martha, she had been with Tommy Skakel. That was all that Dorothy needed to decide that she needed to call the Skakel home. And each time, 18-year-old Julie answered the phone quickly. Dorothy noted that she didn't sound groggy or disoriented, even though it was well past 2 a.m. And they had school tomorrow. When Dorothy asked to speak to Tommy, he also got on the phone quickly and also didn't sound like somebody who had just been woken up. Nobody had any answers, and the Skakels really didn't seem particularly concerned with the fact that Martha was missing. Julie eventually suggested that Dorothy call their cousins, the Terrians, so she did. When Mrs. Terrian answered, Dorothy explained that she was looking for Martha, and Mrs. Terrian said that she would check and call her back. But when she did, the news wasn't good. Martha wasn't there, and oddly enough, neither was Jimmy. At this point, Dorothy started calling anybody that she could think of who might know where Martha was, but nobody had seen her. With what she felt were no other options, she finally called the Greenwich Police Department. An officer came to the home, he took a report, and left. So with nothing else to do, Dorothy stayed awake for a while, waiting for news before she eventually dozed off in the library. But when she woke up the next morning, Martha was still missing. By the morning, Dorothy had run out of patience. She was terrified. She decided to go straight across the street to the Skakel home. When Dorothy got there, she noticed that there was a motorhome parked in the driveway. So she had thought to herself, maybe Martha had fallen asleep inside. When Dorothy knocked on the door, Michael answered. And this gave her pause because at this point in the morning, all of the kids that went to private school had already left. So Michael should have already been at school at that point. But for some reason, he was still home. Dorothy would later describe Michael as looking hungover, barefoot, and wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Dorothy told Michael that she was looking for Martha, and Michael had told her that Martha wasn't there. Dorothy asked if she could check the motorhome, but before Michael could say yes or no, a Skakel employee stepped in and said that he would check instead. According to the employee, he looked inside but found nothing. With no information to go on, Dorothy decided to return home. By 12:30 that afternoon, the search would come to an end. Martha's friend Sheila heard that she was missing and decided to go around and try to look for her. And unfortunately, Sheila found Martha's body under a large pine tree in the backyard of the Moxley home. Martha was lying face down. Her pants and underwear were pulled down around her knees. Her head had been beaten so badly that it was obvious that she had been killed with extreme force. Because Greenwich was such a tight-knit community and things like this didn't happen, word about Martha's murder spread quickly. At school, Julie's friend Andrea Shakespeare, who was at the party the night prior, was pulled out of class and told to accompany Julie Skakel, the elder sister, home. When they arrived back in Belhaven, and as they approached the Skakel driveway, it was packed with cars and they had to park on the street. Before they even had a chance to react, get out of the car and go up to the door, Michael came running. He was described as hyper, frantic, and before anybody could even blurt out a question or say anything to him, he just said, "Martha was killed. Tommy and I were the last ones to see her last night." The strange thing about Michael's admission was that nobody had asked. While the entire town was still reeling from the shock, investigators were already uncovering something that should have made this an open and shut case. Not far from Martha's body, they found a Tony Penna 6-iron golf club, and this golf club was snapped into pieces from the amount of force that was used to murder Martha. The handle of the golf club and an 18 to 20-inch section of the shaft of the club were missing, gone. Maybe they were discarded, maybe they were hidden, maybe they were destroyed. But either way, they would never be recovered. Martha's autopsy had confirmed what was already clear when they had seen Martha's body, that what caused her death were blunt traumatic injuries to the head. Whoever did this had beaten her so viciously that the golf club had shattered on impact. What mattered most wasn't just how she died, it was where she died and where the club came from. This wasn't just some particular weapon left behind by a stranger. This Tony Penna golf club was rare, and it wasn't something that a killer just happened to pick up that night. In fact, that golf club came straight from the Skakel home, from a matching set of clubs that belonged to their mother who had passed away, Anne. A direct link between Martha's murder and the family that had been at the center of this from the start. This should have been the moment when everything fell into place, when they discovered that this was a golf club from the Skakel home. It should have led to an arrest. But this is Belhaven, Greenwich, and the Skakels aren't just rich, they're untouchable. Their name didn't just come with money, it came with power, and power has a way of making problems disappear. Instead of this case closing in days, it dragged on for decades. There's still litigation going on to this day. The evidence was there, the connections were obvious, but when the suspect list includes the wealthiest family in town, a family that is related to the Kennedys, justice moves at a different speed, if it moves at all. This is where I'm going to leave it for part 1. In part 2, we're going to get into the investigation, or lack thereof, and how the case went cold for over 20 years. Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard today, please like, review, subscribe. You can find me on TikTok, fthatpod, Instagram, fthat_pod. If you want to listen to all of my episodes, including my archived episodes, bonus episodes, and ad-free episodes, Patreon, fthatpod.